On behalf of Siegel, director and founder, and the VRM leadership team, I welcome you to today's webinar. As you know, such panels are an important co-curricular activity. I would like now to proceed and acknowledge our panelists, Dr. Rami Farha and Michelle Ashkowitz, and give them the opportunity to introduce themselves. Rami, we'll start with you. You have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rami Farha. I'm a partner with Oliver Wyman. I lead our operational risk platform for the Americas, have been working for more than 13 years now in the financial services industry on a number of operational risk topics and non-financial risks more broadly. I work in aspects of operational resiliency, third-party risk management, change risk, and all other emerging operational risks. Thank you for the opportunity. Great to be here today.
Michelle.
Oh, good morning, everyone. I'm Michelle Ashkowitz. I'm Managing Director and Head of Operational Risk at Societe Generale. I'm really excited to be here with you all today. Just to give you a little bit of my background, I've been in banking my entire career, but been fortunate enough to work in all three lines of defense. So I started my career as an internal auditor. After receiving my master's in finance, I moved into the front office, and I spent time in San Francisco working in mergers and acquisitions.
Thank you, Rami and Michelle, for your introductions. So we proceed with the questions. The motivation for today's panel has to do with the implications of the pandemic-inspired regulatory guidance titled Sound Practices to Strengthen Operational Resilience in Banking. So with that in mind, our first question is, what does operational resilience mean to you, and how financial services institutions have organized around the topic?
No, I mean, I think this is the million-dollar question these days in operational risk management and risk management more broadly. Operational resiliency has become, in my mind, a strategic priority for financial institutions and needs to become ultimately a continuous program that banks, insurers, pension funds, all sorts of financial institutions run consistently. The way I would define operational resiliency is, I would say it's the embedding of capabilities, processes, behaviors, and systems to allow a firm to continue to carry out its mission. It's in the face of disruption. It's a broad definition, and therefore the reason why this is such a complicated topic this day, and involves both having a clear strategy, a clear program, having good planning and preparedness, linking into incident and crisis management, and conducting a series of integrated exercises and testing to continuously improve your operational resiliency capabilities.
The practice of operational resilience has really been elevated, and we need to think about it more in terms of being forward thinking. Traditionally, the focus was on recovery, and now it's more on how can we sustain our operation. So it's a real change in mind shift. And we need to really take a step back and understand really what the spirit of the guidance from our regulators are. So from the perspective of operational resilience, it's the ability to deliver operations, including those critical operations and our core business lines, through a disruption of any type of hazard. It's the outcome of effective operational risk management combined with financial and operational resources to prepare, adapt, withstand, and recover from disruption. So, I personally was happy to see the guidance from our regulators on this topic. And it provides us what the expectations, what they're looking for. You don't always get this. So, the spirit is that it's bringing together different sets of competencies, either it be business continuity, IT, cyber, third party, or our data, and breaking down those silos between those areas. It's those intersections of risks, if you want to look at it from that way. And firms today are really organizing themselves in different ways, and also have very different timelines when they're dealing with operational resilience. The guidance is directed very much to large domestic banks that are very complex in nature. From my perspective at SG, they're not prescribing anything right now for foreign banks. However, we know that the regulators are going to become knocking at our doors, and we need to start to think about this topic and start to work on it. So collaboration becomes very important. Working with, for me, the first line of defense and the business continuity and cyber third-party risk. I manage it for the firm, so that's an easy one. But we really do need to work very closely together. And the approach that we've taken at SG is we have a good relationship with our first line teams, and we have a co-sponsored project or initiative between the chief risk officer and the COO. I take the lead on the second line, and we're working very much as a kind of a partnership with the first line in addressing the needs and the requirements of the regulation.
Great, thank you. So the resilience guidance you're saying represents a mind shift in the regulatory expectations of risk management, operational risk management at banks. So that is an amazing thing for a guidance that does not promulgate new regulations, but simply asks us to use the existing regulations in novel ways. Strategic imperative is a good way of putting it, that resilience has become. In terms of the next question, have operational risk management processes been affected by the pandemic? And what might some examples be? Any of these processes might survive the pandemic? And where is the risk most more significant? For example, execution risk. So Rami, we'll go to you with that question as well.
The pandemic was definitely, I would say, in many ways, a blessing in disguise for people in the operational risk management space. It definitely raised overall the profile of operational risk management at financial institutions. It really made sure that operational risk is talked about, that operational risk people are at the table for some of the more senior discussions. And there are definitely a lot of learnings that have come out of the pandemic that financial institutions need to keep in mind going forward. What I would summarize the learnings to be is, if I was to take maybe the 5 no regret moves that I see financial institutions having to take coming out of this pandemic and into the future, the first one is to think more and more about how to adopt what I would call real-time risk management approaches. So moving towards more agile, more dynamic ways of thinking about risk management, as opposed to doing work at periodic and infrequent time periods. It's important for them, secondly, to move to more dynamic and process-based risk management. It's extremely important that ultimately what risk managers are doing is they're making sure that processes are running and they deliver the services that the processes support, and therefore the lens with which they should think about risk identification, assessment, and reporting should be tied more and more to processes. The third is enhancing third-party risk management frameworks. It's extremely important in this connected and intertwined world, if you want, to really think about our third parties and how we apply more and more vigor to the onboarding, the ongoing monitoring, the offloading, I guess, of third parties. The fourth is thinking more and more about scenario analysis, and we can talk about this later, but how to enhance and integrate scenario analysis capabilities to help key users like business continuity planning, risk quantification, understanding return on investment for some of the enhancements that they want to make. And then finally, I would say the fifth big lesson learned was that we need to continue enhancing operational resiliency capabilities, hence what I said earlier on this call about it being the million-dollar question or the topic du jour, if you want, when it comes to operational risk management.
There are processes that were very much affected when we, really went into lockdown, very quickly. So firms really had to, obviously shift our workforce to being, remote overnight. And, in banking, especially, our traditional firms like mine, we didn't have a lot of people day to day working from home. You never had traders working from home. You never had anyone who was, sending funds outside the bank working from home. So take the technology aspect out of it, which was a challenge in and of itself. We had to very quickly, assess the risks around our processes and our controls, and really, look very closely at our payment process. We look very closely at any manual processes, and very specifically with our manual processes, you need to develop some tactical solutions that are, you don't have traders sitting next to each other anymore and being able to communicate. So, you definitely needed to come up with some tactical solutions. And also there are some logistical things about how do you sign some documents still needed to be physically signed as letters of credit. So there are practices that have continued, on the third party side. We did an outreach to all of our vendors immediately as we were anticipating lockdown. We continue to do that just as a normal course of business now. So I think it's put us in better touch with our vendors. But many of the practices, I would say, continued because we had to adjust ourselves. So, what the interesting thing was that when we went into lockdown in March of 2020, we had a very high period of volatility in the market, means very high volume. So we stretched our systems, and, we also had a lot, we also had to keep up with the day-to-day from an operational perspective. So many of the practices that we put in at that period of time, meaning daily KPIs, frequency, improvements on our capacity of our systems and the reporting on that, daily updates to our CRO and senior management. So a lot of these things have continued post, the pandemic period of time and that crisis period.
Tolerance for disruption is the phrase that the guidance uses, right? So that is the concept around which resilience is defined. So that's great. The next question is, what aspects of the sound practices are most challenging to implement in practice across the financial services industry? So with that question, we go to Rami. Rami?
Sure. So I think that there is definitely some key, I would say, areas in the guidance that are worth highlighting. One is, I think the accountability and emphasizing board and senior management responsibilities for resiliency, and how do you clearly demonstrate that board and senior management are involved in driving the resiliency program. A second challenge is around the concept, if you want, of the integration, which is how are we, to Michelle's point, integrating all these risk programs, cyber, third-party recovery and resolution planning, etc., together, and how do we, do all the dependency mapping, scenarios, governance, escalation, and break down really the risk management silos so that we can demonstrate consistency of practices and coordination across the risk disciplines. And how do you integrate operational resiliency into the firm's overall risk management framework so that, per the point I made earlier, it becomes part of almost your BAU approach to risk management. The other two aspects that I think are challenging are, one is around measurement. So there is no explicit mention of how to go about calculating impact tolerances, but there is an expectation that firms articulate their tolerance for disruption. So how do you as a firm define measurable indicators and thresholds that can be monitored and reviewed by senior management and the board to understand whether you are operating within your tolerance or not? And then finally, scenarios, and how do you maintain an inventory of severe but plausible scenarios that you use to define your impact tolerance, your capabilities that you need to build, the testing that you need to put in place, and how do you embed and emphasize, I guess, the importance of scenario throughout the operational resiliency practices. So I would say, at least from my vantage point and what I've seen, kind of, our clients struggle with the most, I would say those are some of the key challenges that people are focused on figuring out.
Thank you. So there's an issue of integrating the 3 lines of defense for the sake of resilience, and a question of metrics. How do we get to a metric for tolerance for disruption? In disaster recovery terms, we think in terms of how quickly we can bring up our systems, in terms of days, and that sort of thing. So, Michelle, please, if you can answer the same question.
Sure. So I think that there's many challenges around this, and I think Rami has hit on the majority of them. The identification of your important business services is very important, because you want to hone in on those that are going to not just impact your firm, but the market as well. So making sure that your senior leadership is good with the methodology used to define what those processes and services are, and then looking at them. And we mentioned third party, but one thing I'd like to when you're looking at the supply chain, your third parties, you really have to consider that when you're looking at the chain of your then the processes around your important business services. What we've learned from the pandemic period of time is that we're not just dealing with our third parties or our fourth parties. We have going down the supply chain of our vendors. So as we go through and understand the challenges with our important business services and our applications and the processes and controls, vendors play a very large part of it, and our subcontractors in that vendor chain is going to be extremely important, not just from a performance perspective, but a cybersecurity perspective. So cyber security interlinks with so many different areas of this that I'd say that is also a concern as we go through this.
Great, thank you, Rami, and thank you, Michelle, for the very rewarding answers to the question. The next question is, what is a critical area in operational risk and resilience about which you are most concerned? Michelle.
So I just gave you a hint of that's cyber resilience. We know we're all seeing this, is that in the industry today, the number of significant industry-wide cyber-related incidents have increased drastically since the onset of the pandemic. We've all increased and improved upon our cyber hygiene. However, the hackers are getting smarter. So to give you an idea, year to date, industry information is providing us that there's been about 100 significant cybersecurity events industry-wide this year. So that, you take a step back and you think of that's kind of scary. And we have doubled the number of 0-day vulnerabilities than we had last year. So that in and of itself is makes me as an operational risk manager, concerned, and for those who aren't sure what a 0-day vulnerability is, those are vulnerabilities in which a patch hasn't been developed yet. So, that obviously is a big concern for me. And then secondly, I mentioned it before, it's around our third parties and our fourth and possibly fifth parties, and looking at how they are resilient and what their activities and resilience activities are.
Thank you. Rami?
Yeah, I mean, I think Michelle touched on a lot of the things that we hear regularly across the industry in terms of the elevated risks. The one that I would highlight and put up on people's agenda when it comes to maybe the broader, let's say, operational risk spectrum of risks is a people risk. And I think a lot of firms are really worried about what is this remote working environment, hybrid environment, what have you. What are all the changes that have come upon us with the pandemic? What do these risks, these changes, mean for our people? Are we at risk of seeing lower engagement, higher absenteeism, fatigue, challenges with getting talent in, challenges with retaining talent? There is a lot of demand out there for people who have, versatile skills, who are good thinkers, thought leaders that can really deal well with uncertainty, given the world that we live in, and so on and so forth. And those are typically the type of people and candidates that you would want to bring into an area like operational risk management, which is constantly evolving. So I think the people risk, I would probably put it up there as one of the other key challenges that financial institutions are very concerned about. And if I was the chief risk officer of a large financial institution, I would be really worried about as well.
Thank you. These are very thoughtful answers. In terms of the January 22nd, right, 2022, banks need to adapt to Basel III by moving away from the advanced measurement approach and adopt a single standardized risk-sensitive approach. So the question is, what are the benefits of this approach? Is the pandemic going to affect the implementation of the approach? And will banks need to continue to use AMA type internal models to supplement the new approach? So these are some of the questions that come up with this deadline that's coming up with the beginning of next year. Rami.
Yeah, it's a good question, Bob, and I'd be curious to hear also from Michelle how at SocGen they're thinking about this. But what I would say is I have not gotten the sense that people are assuming that we're not going to go to the standardized measurement approach or SMA. Ultimately, we are going to get there. I think you can point as much as you want to all the benefits and the disadvantages of the approach, but I think firms are definitely planning for that transition. There are some efforts that are going on in some jurisdictions, one being Canada, where I'm from and live, where there is a big effort right now to go through historical loss data, making sure that it's of the appropriate quality and accuracy, because it's a key component to informing the SMA calculation even more probably than AMA in the past. So I think that train has kind of left the station. I think the question now is, what do financial institutions do when it comes to maybe building what some would call more risk sensitive models and AMA and AMA type models for all their flaws. I mean, at the very least, there was a modeling aspect, a projection going forward, an element of what could happen in the future. Although the challenge with these types of models is always, is the past representative of the future, and therefore good enough to calibrate and fine-tune these models so you can predict what's going to happen going forward. So I don't have a crystal ball, but what I would say is that in my mind, some of the winners in the new world are going to be people who are going to be able to supplement whatever calculations are there for SMA purposes that achieve a lot of the benefits of SMA in the first place, with maybe more risk-sensitive approaches to quantification of operational risk, whether that be AMA-like, adopting the construct of AMA, but thinking, less out in the tail maybe than what AMA did, which was one of the reasons for the instability of those numbers, or using scenario analysis, which was a discipline that came to the forefront with AMA and became a good supplement to the modeling that was done in AMA. So how do we use scenario analysis? Maybe I would say call them structured scenario analysis to get a better sense of the risks, to have more forward-looking approaches, to be able to do a better job maybe of measuring your return on investment, so you kind of get a feel for roughly, as I'm putting all these controls and tools in place to protect myself, what is the return that I'm getting from a reduction in exposure? And I think with SMA, it's kind of hard to do that. So I think the firms that are going to be winners here and that are going to be able to do maybe a better job on the businesses and delivering business objectives will be the ones who supplement AMA with some more modeling ability.
Right. Thank you for the thorough response. Michelle?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. And, for me, I haven't been actually too involved. I'm a branch location of a foreign organization. So all the modeling is managed out of Paris for me, but that being said, I think I agree, with Rami is talking about in regard to scenarios, and we will need to complement it. And I think one of the things that we're seeing now is that how important our scenario analysis programs are, and looking at what's going to be required coming out of the guidance from our regulators. The use of those scenarios and those multi-tiered scenarios are going to be, very important to be supplemental data.
Yes, just a note for our students in the audience. Scenario analysis came out of this idea of trying to deal with uncertainty. We don't know what the future is going to be like. But maybe we can think of different states of the world that might be coming in the future, and then you deal with the uncertainty of maybe some of those scenarios are going to be relevant, and that gives you a sense of having this ability to measure uncertainty. Okay, so the next question is about the role of operational risk management teams in developing and executing severe but plausible scenarios. That's a term that the guidance uses as well. And what is the evolution of the scenario analysis discipline within banking? So we'll go to Michelle with that.
Sure. So, the operational risk management, it's really pivotal in developing and maintaining the scenario analysis programs for organizations. That being said, though, we don't run everything in an organization. There are still tabletop exercises that are being done by first line of defense teams. For example, in cybersecurity, again, maybe I'm talking a lot about that today, but it's on my mind. Our teams there run tabletop exercises all the time. They also participate in industry, events. But I was just involved with one that I thought they did a phenomenal job with a ransomware attack, and how do we manage that as a firm. But if you take a step back and you look at a very formalized scenario program, it is informed by the components of operational risk management, and using the data that the operational risk management is responsible for, either be our incidents, the results of our risk assessments, our KRIs. All of the data points that we have are very important inputs to performing scenarios. and not only performing them, but identifying which scenarios we should perform. And so, the approach that we take, and, I have a specialist on my team who runs the program for me. And, I want to make sure first that she's aware of where all the risks in the organization, all the operational risks in the organization. And, when we're doing the results of our RCSA, that really helps us identify, all right, these are the areas that we should probably be working on scenarios. So that's where, the operational risk component comes into it. But then, it's working with the individuals in the first line of defense. I work with my old colleagues in operations, IT, really to run through these, scenarios and identifying, where we could go wrong and what controls we can put in. And then also, putting a dollar figure associated with how much money could the firm lose if we were, if this was, if this situation was to happen. So, I think, operational resilience, as I mentioned before, it is, and Rami has brought it up as well, as we look at our important business services and, the chain, the process chain, the need to run multi-tiered scenarios and identify, our tolerance for disruption is going to be important. And, what I look at and what I've learned from the pandemic is that we were in a multi-tiered scenario. We went remote. We had high volatility, record high volatility in some of our business lines. We had social unrest going on at the same time. And, you take a step back and you're like, wow, if you run these types of scenarios, you then develop your playbooks or you adjust your playbooks. And, you position yourself to be ready for, any potential, hopefully we don't run into it again, but, really any potential situation that you may have. And the good outcome of running these multi-tiered scenarios is going to be the adjustment to your playbooks and being ready for the future.
Thank you. Rami.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in my mind, I've always thought of scenario analysis as, maybe one of the most underutilized tools that we have in our quiver when it comes to risk management and operational risk management in particular. So I think that, there is definitely more and more awareness about the importance of, scenario analysis. I think, as Michelle mentioned, ultimately the guidance, and I think you highlighted that as well, Bob, talks about severe but plausible scenarios. So I think what this then, means for a lot of firms across the industry is, what does this, what do these words mean, and how do I come up with, scenarios that allow me to conduct more integrated exercises, testing, etc., to test whether I'm able to withstand the disruption from these scenarios or not. And one of the big, obviously, challenges and one of the big roles that the operational risk management team can play in that exercise is to really try and draw that line between what is severe but plausible and, frankly, the doomsday Armageddon type scenarios that are just too improbable to happen. And frankly, it's not even financially possible for any financial institution to kind of guard against those scenarios. So that's one of the things that operational resiliency, in my mind, one of the key differences between that operational resiliency and business continuity disaster recovery, in that for operational resiliency, it has really pushed the envelope when it comes to operational risk management teams to develop tailored scenarios that are based on disruption risk and sophisticated impact tolerances to guide the actions that we need to take in those severe but plausible scenarios. Whereas kind of for business continuity disaster recovery, the focus may have been a bit more on what I would say maybe low to moderately severe scenarios. And I think that developing these scenarios and having them be meaningful, and having also the business leaders that we work with to build operational resiliency programs, have them relate to these scenarios understand and appreciate that they are actually scenarios that could happen. They're not like pure fiction. And then putting the meaningful thinking around what is our tolerance to disruption is that continuous cycle I see being built out in operational resiliency. But it starts with the definition and the design of those severe but plausible scenarios.
Yes, that's well said. Thank you. And of course, the pandemic has triggered a cascade of risks and outcomes across every aspect of life globally. And in the process has generated a lot of data points that at some point we are going to have to figure out how to use. So the question is, how do we use the newly available data to improve the operational risk management discipline and the operational resilience of financial institutions? Rami.
Yeah, I mean, I think I touched already on some of the points, so I will try to maybe be brief and just say that, like, ultimately, I think that, as you go through that cycle that I was talking about earlier of, developing meaningful scenarios, coming up with thoughtful impact tolerances, going through the testing exercise to see whether you can stay within those tolerances and continue to refine your capabilities, etc. I think a big part of coming up with meaningful measures like the impact tolerances is to actually leverage, historical data that is available to you to come up with those meaningful tolerances. So that's one way in which the kind of supplemental data is being used. I think that there is definitely a need, and Michelle touched on third-party risk management. There is definitely a need, I think, for financial institutions to challenge themselves in terms of what extra information about third parties, whether it's their financial health, whether it's potential concentrations that we have, whether it's potential concentrations in the supply chain of the financial institution. Those are the types of additional pieces of information that people should bring into the fray. And then the last thing I would say is also with the availability of all the kind of the non-traditional data out there, whether it's through social media or what have you, and the importance of something like reputational impacts on financial institutions. Those types of data and having more social listening and seeing what are, for example, various stakeholders that we care about, like our customers, etc., saying about us as a financial institution, could also be a useful way to flag to the financial institutions that there are areas where we need to focus more on, or things that we need to be more wary of.
Thank you. And briefly, Michelle, can you comment on the same question?
Sure. So yeah, data is as an operational risk manager, I'm very excited about this aspect of having more data points, and we can get it through our own organization, and then what we use, and Rami brought it up in regard to third party vendors. We get feeds in on the financial health, so I have data every day on the financial health of my vendors. We have a service, an external service as well, that gives you the health from a cybersecurity perspective of vendors. So, having all of this data for me makes my job a lot easier. Being able to connect the data and then being able to, help our management. I think what's important is that we can make data-driven decisions, and that really enhances operational efficiency. It takes that gut feeling out of it, and it gives me the ability to go in front of our senior leadership in the organization and our C-suite and say, rather than just make a statement, I can just say, using the information that we have. Using the analytics, we can have strategic discussions around, embedding data-driven decision-making from the ground up. And that is really what helps firms become much more agile. And it also allows us to be much more predictive in nature and really anticipate and mitigate threats before they happen. So this to me is, a really exciting aspect of the evolution of operational risk management.
Well, thank you. And I totally agree with both of your comments, thoughtful comments. The next um, question has to do with any career advice that you might wish to share with our students. Rami?
I will keep it simple. I'm sure Michelle will have a lot more to say, given she is hiring day in, day out in this space. But I would say this is like operational risk management and risk management more broadly are, definitely great areas to be in. Operational risk management in particular, I think the way I characterize it is there is never a dull moment because there is always something new that's coming around the corner. So I think that it's important, as operational risk managers, to develop, that ability to really think about problems from first principles, not being wedded to prescriptive ways of doing things, thinking outside the box, and looking out there for, the opportunities that lie ahead and that are multiple and numerous. And like I said earlier, this pandemic was a blessing in disguise for operational risk managers because it really elevated the stature of the discipline in people's minds. And I think, therefore, the best advice I could give maybe to people is to kind of keep an open mind as you go out there and explore opportunities and think of this as an evergreen field where there will always be new things to do and it won't get too boring too quickly.
I'm going to give you a little more, advice that I give my kids, I think. First it's, build your network, and if you haven't started to yet, consider, starting it now. And then leverage that network that you have career discussions. And you don't have to decide now what you want to do, the rest of your life. I didn't think I was going to be, an operational risk manager, 10 years ago. So, really just as you progress in your career, step up to the challenges, get out of your comfort zone and, take stretch assignments. Anything you do, you're going to learn from, you're going to have a takeaway from, and it's all the experiences in your career and when I say your career, I also mean, your college career that help mold you and help, bring you up. And to be honest, I don't know if I'll be an operational risk manager the rest of my career, who knows, it's just really, just take advantage of different situations and, have a mentor, and have someone that you can speak to. And, I personally have had a couple, so, leverage that. But if you are interested in operational risk, and I hope many of you are, I stress the idea of data, having a background in data analytics, taking some courses, and that is huge. I mean, that's something that, a skill set that I'm looking for. Writing is also very important. So your business writing and your ability to convey your messages at all levels in the organization is very important. Your ability to influence and to get your ideas across. And then don't forget about, soft skills, those interpersonal skills, really, focus in and hone on those. But as Rami said, and you probably hear it in my voice, operational risk is an exciting, very exciting topic right now. And it is never the same day to day. And, I don't know how today will play out, to be honest with you. It could be, a huge event that may happen, or hopefully it's just a calm day. But, you don't know when you get up in the morning. You just have to have a very strong team around you, which I'm very blessed to have. And, be able to, address and be able to influence in the organization.
Well, thank you. That's a lot of wisdom in those remarks by Michelle and Rami. And just to point out, recently, Barclays is making a change at the CEO level, and the chosen new CEO is the group CRO, the group chief risk officer of Barclays. So that's great news for the field. To see that type of honor bestowed on the skill set that CROs bring to the table. So very briefly, is there a takeaway that you would like to see our audience, um, uh, you know, take home with? Just one thing that you might point out as being the most important thing. Rami?
Very quickly, I would say, as you probably saw and heard in this conversation, there are loads of open questions out there. So, to me, the key takeaway from today's discussion is this is a field that is far from having reached a mature state, and definitely there is a lot to be done and a lot of open questions that still need to be resolved.
Michelle?
Yeah, that's a good answer. I would say that, it's the, keep in mind the interconnectivity and that operational risk managers can't do everything themselves in the organization, that you definitely need to partner and consult with the various first lines of defense and, operations, IT, cyber, data, and third-party risk.
Well, thank you so much. Our heartfelt thanks to Dr. Rami Farha and Michelle Askowitz for sharing so generously their insights, experience, and expertise with our students and general audience. We conclude today's webinar. Goodbye for now. Thank you so much.